The moon radiated a ghostly glow upon the streets of Mondstadt as Ganyu made her way back to Angel's Share. The previous hours had been of nothing but walking from door to door of each house that occupied a Mondstadt citizen, and while Amber's strength had been spent at the end, Ganyu's was far from even wavered down. As an adeptess, her physical strength was much more durable than a human's, meaning she could walk for miles and still feel no wear on her muscles. While she didn't look strong, her age and experience of years of war, knowledge, and roaming the Mount of Leeway said otherwise. Something Amber hadn't been aware of, seeing Ganyu had told her that the horns atop her head were nothing more than decorative props. By now, Ganyu was aware that her attempts of cloaking her adeptus nature were useless, but was relieved that her company had just bought her excuse, even though it was dead obvious that Amber knew it was a lie. In the end, Ganyu could respect her sidekick for having caught on that she intended to not be open about her true nature, and that was enough for Ganyu to trust Amber. It wasn't because she was ashamed of her true self, but more as a way to prevent people from judging or begging her for guidance as if she was a goddess with powers that could alter fate. The latter was the more clear reason, seeing humans expected to be blessed by the gods out of pity and arrogance when they can't find answers for themselves. It was part of their nature, and back when Ganyu had still resided in the mountains, she constantly had found herself in said situation. Working at Yuehai Pavilion, out of the eyes of strangers, gave her an escape from the constant harassment, but it also wore her down to a certain degree. However, if she had to pick her poison, she'd definitely choose working endlessly. The arrogance of humans was definitely a worse choice, and she didn't feel like getting called names and being bullied by people who couldn't see past their own rear end. Now, she was at the mercy of fate, searching for answers while amongst the people of Mondstadt. She was thankful that nobody had taken interest in her, minus her new mysterious business partner. He was clearly well versed in the differences between Leeway's culture and Mondstadt's, seeing he'd guessed her to be from Leeway just based off of her clothing. Just because of that reason alone, Ganyu knew that she had to think carefully before speaking in this meetup. This man was an expert at reading and judging people, and Ganyu couldn't risk giving information away that was critical to the mission she was on. She burned that into her mind as she approached the back of the tavern, finding the bartender resting lazily against the back door of the building. "You made it," he said. "Good. Now we can get to business." Ganyu wasn't sure how to feel, but just to be safe, she remained attentive should this whole meeting go south. Her main weapon was her bow, but she was very well trained in defensive and offensive combat as well, and had used said tactics plenty of times in her lifetime to escape dangerous situations. "I trust that anything regarding our agreement was kept out of your conversation with the acting Grand Master?" he added.
"Yes,"
Ganyu assured, nodding her head.
"We only spoke of the reason I came here, and came to a conclusion on how to resolve it."
The man nodded his head. "Interesting, but I have no interest in the conclusion, only the details of why you came here in the first place," he clarified bluntly. Ganyu decided to keep the details to a minimum to avoid spilling anything that could affect the resolution Jean had come up with.
"Yes, well, to put it straight, as of yesterday night, Leeway Harbor was attacked and sunk into the ocean by an enemy unlike anything that we'd ever faced. In the process, my co-worker was severely injured, and my boss was killed by said enemy."
Her partner showed intrigue, but knew there was more to be said. That is something indeed," he commented. "Now, let me be clear. I know who you really are, as much as who your co-worker is, and who your boss was." Ganyu flinched at that, but for some reason felt as if she had nothing to fear. Upon his next comment, she knew she could be open with this man on anything regarding the tragic event she was in Mondstadt for. Allow me to drop any skepticism you may have about me, seeing if we're going to work together, we can't have any distrust towards one another. He started. My name is Diluc. I am one of your boss's best partners regarding wine profiting. Ganyu immediately recognized the name, seeing she'd seen him multiple times in documents that had met the center of her desk. All of her nerves rested, and all of her anxiety lifted from her body, knowing she had nothing to fear.
Ah! Sir Diluc of Dawn Winery!
Ganyu confirmed.
It's a pleasure. I apologize for my secrecy, but I couldn't speak of the matter at hand to some stranger.
Diluc held a hand up, a mild chuckle following the gesture as us showing that he understood. You are smart to do so, Ganyu of the Keqing. He complimented. I was simply testing you to be sure that you really were who I suspected. Congratulations. You passed. Ganyu smiled as an answer, to which Diluc took as an assurance to continue. Now, back to the matter at hand. Diluc started. Though I have revealed my true identity, and we have a better understanding about one another, I want to make it clear that any business between us is still to remain hidden from the Knights. Is that understood? Ganyu nodded as an assurance. All right, we may continue then. Let's start with this enemy. You said they were unlike anything you have faced in the past. Explain how they are different from the average enemy. Ganyu proceeded with explaining the same details she'd given to Jean, being sure not to leave out anything. At the end of it, Diluc had an expression on his face that had matched Jean's. Heavy thought and focus. A Fatui soldier who can absorb elemental energy and move as fast as a flash of lightning. This is truly something I've never faced nor am aware of in the Fatui's ranks. Diluc confirmed. Same goes for the symbol you mentioned. Never have the Fatui had a separate group of super soldiers that are capable of such abilities. So either we are dealing with some form of a new creation, or the Tsaritsa herself has initiated some phase of her plan to reset Teyvat entirely, and part of it is unleashing this group of lethal assassins.
So, you can believe that attack wasn't the last as well?
Ganyu questioned. Yes, and that their targets are not just nations and their leaders, but the archons as well. Diluc confirmed. In other words, the Tsaritsa plans to potentially eradicate the entirety of Teyvat by eliminating their greatest threats using this posse of deadly assailants. Ganyu gulped, finding Diluc's assumption sensible. Why else would they be targeting leaders specifically? Because they were the biggest threat.
If that's the case, then what do we do to stop it?
Ganyu questioned, fear staining her tone. For now, you just stay quiet about our interaction and follow whatever the Knights have in mind. He answered. In the meantime, I'll contact some connections about the matter at hand, seeing we need to find out if my assumption is correct before we do anything too hasty. If we move too quickly, we could leave an opening that could cost lives in other nations' existence. Therefore, we must first confirm what their next act is in this potential plan to find an answer to stop them. This was the type of plotting Ganyu liked to see, and agreed to the conditions. It was clear that Diluc knew how to properly handle a dire situation, and right now, he was clearly her best ally.
Alright, I will follow the Knights of Favonia's plan for now, while you figure out what the next phase of action will be.
Ganyu agreed. Good. For now, our business is concluded, Ganyu of the Keqing. I'll update you via a letter in a couple of days, so please watch your mailbox for a letter with a wax seal that carries an imprint of a boar. That'll be how our business will remain confidential. Ganyu nodded, but before her departure, had one last question.
One more thing, Sir Diluc.
What is it?
He replied, what about my co-worker? Is our business to remain hidden from her as well?
Ganyu confirmed. For now. Diluc answered. Shall things get more drastic, only then will the Yuhong need to be involved in our meetings. Ganyu nodded, turning to leave in the other direction. She processed everything she'd been told by her new secret accomplice, her stomach turning in knots. If the assumed plan that Diluc had processed was the actual truth, things were about to get even more chaotic. She hadn't been able to stop one, so was there even a chance of winning against these supposed assailants? Another critical problem in the air at the moment was the absence of Rex Lapis and the Adepti. Had they faced the same fate as Ningguang and Liyue Harbor? That was something she didn't even want to think about, but she couldn't lie to herself either. It was clear that there was peril afoot, but until she knew for sure, she'd just have to wait. A wait she wasn't sure she could handle. Upon opening the door to her temporary abode, she wasn't even tired, so she decided to draw herself a bath. One difference between Liyue Harbor and Mondstadt's infrastructure was that the water for the baths in Liyue Harbor was filtered straight from the springs of the mountains. Here, it was drawn from somewhere else, and that made Ganyu have second thoughts about her plan. Clean mountain water was all she'd ever bathed in, so doing anything outside of that was enough to draw Ganyu outside of her comfort zone. If the gate to Mondstadt wasn't closed, she would just go out and find a natural spring. But thus was the cruelty of life. She had found a lone box on the bed upon walking into her little home, the package having contained the extra clothes that Jean had promised her earlier. It hadn't been anything fancy, just some plain white dress shirts that were made of a soft fabric, along with some beige pants that were loose to Ganyu's thin legs. Not exactly her preferred style of clothing, but it was better than smelling like a campfire. Then she paused, realizing that she had just confirmed that her body reeked of the essence of a simmering campfire. That settled it. After confirming she needed one, she decided to just take the bath, returning to the wooden tub supported by a metal plate that extended past the length of the bottom of it. Below that was a freshly spread out clutter of charcoals and wood, along with 2 pieces of flint set aside to spark a flame.
If only I had a pyrovision.
Ignoring her thoughts of starting an easy fire, she turned the single water tap and watched as a stream of clear and cool water began to pour and fill the wooden tub. While the water filled the tub, she returned to the base of the tub, grabbing the 2 chunks of flint, and began to clack them together in hopes of creating a spark of fire. After about 10 good hits, the base of the wooden structure was ablaze with flames and slowly beginning to heat the metal plate to where it would then begin to heat the water. Ganyu was no stranger to starting a fire, having done it before on several occasions as a child and adult. During many missions Ningguang had sent her on, she'd had to start a fire with 2 sticks to keep herself warm, so she was pretty familiar with the task at this point. A pyrovision surely would have made things easier, but she had accepted her fate as a cryo user, so she just went with whatever she was given in a situation that required the task. Knowing her bath wouldn't be ready for a while, she returned to her provided bed and sat on the edge of it. Much had happened as of late, too much for her to comprehend, and taking just a moment to sit and think was a relief to her sanity. She had survived the Archon War, but only because of her lord Morax, but wasn't sure if she could handle another potential war. While Ningguang wasn't necessarily anybody she was close to, it still had been unbelievable that she was killed in 2 blows. Ningguang had always been a very strong and intelligent woman, so to even think she could be defeated and killed in 2 strikes was blasphemy. Yet here she was, somehow alive after said person was murdered, living with the traumatizing memories of their gruesome end. It was raw and vivid, and only until she had this moment to stop and think did the emotions finally meet the surface. In a sudden culmination of emotions and trauma, Ganyu buried her head in her lap and began to cry violently. It wasn't just a quick fit of crying. She bawled and whined like she once had as a child after stubbing her toe on a rock while training with her adoptive mother. Except in this instance, Cloud Retainer wasn't there to comfort her in her soft and ancient wings. She was alone, stressed, sad, and scared. Warm tears stained Ganyu's lap as she continued her fit of releasing her built-up emotions, her breaths rapid and causing her body to tremor. She cried for a long time, up until she finally stopped and couldn't cry any more tears. Her bath was done by the time she'd finished her sobbing, wiping her eyes clean and moving to the bath to turn the tap off. The room was slightly cool due to the vent above, designed to provide ventilation for the fumes of fire, letting in some of the cool wind of the night air. Nonetheless, upon her fingers touching the water, it was a perfect temperature for her bare body to handle, so she proceeded to undress herself. First, she kicked off her shoes, setting them neatly off to the side, then following by slipping off her slick leggings, allowing her skinny legs and wide hips freedom of their confines. Next, she moved to her upper attire, gripping her shirt's base and lifting it up and over her head. Once her hair had made its way through the head hole of her attire, she tossed it to the side, watching as it lazily met the floor. Next came her black silk bra, untying the knot holding it against the middle of her back and allowing the straps to graze down her arms slowly onto the floor. With her breasts now lazily resting against the flesh of her upper chest, she moved to her underwear, slipping it from its tight grip on her hips, past her thighs, and down to the top of her feet. Kicking them from atop her toes, she moved to the last piece of binding that needed to be removed. Moving her hair to the front of her body, she freed it of the hair tie holding it from complete freedom, allowing her icy blue locks to flow gracefully over her flesh. The entirety of her divine fleece shielded her entire back, rear, and even front chest. It's the main reason she kept it tied, seeing she was a warrior and needed her hair not to get snagged or pulled by obstacles. After all, she had only had it trimmed a few times in her entire life of over 1,000 years, and had never gotten it caught on anything while fighting. That's something to be proud of. Now fully undressed, she proceeded to simmer out the blaze beneath the wooden tub using some of the water. The flames died down after 3 cupped handfuls of the liquid, allowing her to finally take the initiative to relax her bare body in the warm bath water. She winced upon stepping into the clear and steamy concoction, but upon dousing her entire body into the practical mini hot spring, her body adapted and relaxed. She let out a long breath that exhumed all of her current stress and grief, allowing her mind and muscles to just go numb and drift away like a calm breeze. Ganyu just lay back for a long moment before dunking her head under the water, finding that the water, walnut spring water naturally filtered from the peaks of Liyue, was very similar to such. She was very glad that she decided to take this bath now, seeing it was what she had needed ever since that dreaded night. Under the water, it was as if she were being embraced by some sort of sensation that put her in a trance, as if she were standing in the sun in a place where there was nothing except happiness and peace. However, just like the spring, she knew she eventually had to rise to the surface and return to her reality of potentially lingering war on the horizon, along with the fact that she was homeless and unemployed. She knew she had to go back, but she envied every moment in that peaceful embrace underneath the water, a peace that lasted for over a minute's time until she finally had to breathe again, and ascended back to her cruel reality. She took in a deep breath upon resurfacing, moving her soaked, icy mane from her eyes, wiping them free of water, and opening them again. It had been nice while it had lasted, but Ganyu knew her paradise couldn't last forever. She laid back against the rim of the tub and took time to catch her breath again, her fleece acting like a practical soft bed against her back. She closed her eyes again, bathing in the steamy atmosphere and thinking about the following day to come. If everything went according to plan, Keqing would be back to normal after the healing session, and that would most likely follow with her getting caught up to speed with the plans Jean has in mind. Upon the thought of Keqing, Ganyu felt herself pause. She thought back to their discussion back at Wangshu Inn, mainly the last part.
Thank you for saving my life. I'll never forget that.
Ganyu hadn't truly realized that she had indeed saved Keqing's life that night, mainly because there was too much going on in the midst of Hellfire. Then, as she thought more about their interactions in the past days, she caught a few things. First was the fact that she had been open with her when she came to see her before leaving Wangshu Inn, even allowing her, and only her, to enter. Sure, she had did so to inform her of additional details needed for Ganyu's meetup with Jean, but why didn't she just tell Ver to tell her instead? It wasn't a trust issue, seeing Wangshu Inn was a trusted source by the Qixing prior to Liyue Harbor's destruction. So, why just her? That was a good question. The Yuheng and her had not always been the most likely to get along, having different views about Morax and all the other gods in general. Usually the closest they'd get to a form of getting along is a case where they'd have no choice but to put their differences aside. Any other time, they'd always kept their distances, greeting one another with a wave or a smile. So, why so open and nice now? Then it clicked. Ganyu gasped at the realization, feeling guilty for her behavior towards Keqing ever since that night. She was scared. She was just as lost and sad as Ganyu was, and she was looking for someone to vent to. Someone who understood her feelings. After all, Liyue Harbor was her home too. Ganyu felt her heart twist at her naivety, feeling like a cold and cruel fool for not realizing the truth sooner.
Rex Lapis above, Ganyu. You are a deluded fool.
She chastised to herself, sighing heavily in guilt.
How could I have been so stupid? She must feel so alone right now, and I treated her as if I didn't care about her feelings.
To avoid waking any potential neighbors, she took a deep breath and did her best to calm down. The past was the past, and there was nothing she could do about it. Therefore, she thought about the next day and how she'd make up for her idiocy.
I could treat her to a meal, or is that not enough? What about a gift? No, that's clearly too much. Ganyu, you are literally a millennia-old half-adeptus. Surely you can come up with something as simple as an apologetic gift.
She chastised herself over and over, up until she was suddenly stopped by the sound of something she wasn't expecting. Knocking. Could things get any more awkward?
1 minute!
She alerted, not wanting some random Mondstadt citizen to walk in on her in her birthday suit. She worked over the rim of the tub and quickly grabbed the provided towel off the rack. Her thick locks caused the floor to become flooded, having absorbed a massive amount of the water in the tub. She worked quickly to wrap herself in the towel, shielding her privates from the eyes of whomever was outside the door, then made her way.
Who is it?
She questioned.
I'm not dressed.
Messenger for Master Jean.
Spoke the voice of what sounded like a young man. Now she was really thankful she had decided to not even open the door the slightest.
What is it?
Ganyu questioned further.
Master Jean has sent me to inform you that the Yu-Hung has successfully arrived at the gate with Captain Kaya's cavalry. They will be transporting her to the cathedral soon, so please do come to the cathedral in the morning after you've had a chance to properly prepare.
She was regretting even asking if things could get more awkward. Now her predicament to resolve her idiotic naivety just got even harder.
Oh, for Morax's sake!
Ma'am, are you okay?
Asked her visitor.
Yes, I'm fine.
She lied.
Please tell the Grandmaster that I will be there.
Yes, Miss Ganyu.
The messenger confirmed. Upon hearing the sound of heavy footsteps in the opposite direction towards the stairway that led to her door, she knew she was safe to return to her self-blaming. It was clear she wasn't going to get any sleep, so she decided to just get ready for her long day ahead. She returned to the bath and pulled the drain plug loose, allowing the tub to slowly become vacant yet again of no bathwater. While the water drained, she proceeded with dressing her body yet again, but this time with a pair of newly provided clothes, then tied her hair into a more controlled state with the hair tie. Now dressed, she took her leave from her abode and headed for the tavern. Once she had arrived, the same intoxicating scent from before purged her senses yet again, moving to the counter and awaiting someone to serve her. It didn't take long, a skinny man with your usual bartender attire returning to his workstation after collecting some glasses from empty tables. "What'll it be, miss?" he questioned, not taking her as the drinking type.
Do you serve coffee?
She questioned.
Only in the mornings,
He answered.
You're in luck, because we just barely started preparing it. If that's what you want, that is.
Ganyu nodded, following up with another request.
I'll take 3 cups. Make sure it's black and the strongest you've got.
The sun had arisen over the horizon by the time Ganyu had finished her 3rd cup of coffee, making sure to pay the bartender the fee of 10 mora before leaving. Her downing of the bitter and strong beverage had given her the boost she'd needed to prepare herself for the day ahead of her, having to somehow show her fellow co-worker that she was an absolute dunce, while also being at full attention shall she have to discuss plans with Jean. Less to say, she had her work cut out for her. Having seen the entirety of the city with Amber the day prior, no directions were needed to reach the cathedral, walking up the steps to the entrance composed of a pair of tall and mighty doors. Upon meeting said entryway, she pushed inwards to the massive building's inner infrastructure, gasping at the sight. Inside was 2 rows of a guess of 6 elongated seats for occupants of the services, and a single long path to the end of the far side of the church. The massive room was only lit by the sun peeking through the stained glass windows that told stories of Mondstadt's history long before Ganyu was even born, and at the end of the farthest side of the mostly open room was a person laid out on the marble floor. Upon noticing the purple-clad clothing and hair, Ganyu knew it was Keqing, to which she took the initiative to pace forward. Her heels clacked and echoed upon her approach, noticing that her colleague was in a sleeping state. She was confused, up until she was met with the accompaniment of a blonde pigtailed girl, looking at Ganyu with a serious gesture.
Welcome to the Mondstadt Cathedral, Ganyu and Keqing.
The girl greeted with joy.
I am Barbara, the main healer of the clergy, and I have been awaiting your arrival. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Barbara.
Ganyu replied with a smile.
Do you mind explaining why the Yuhang is sleeping? It's due to making the healing process go more smoothly, Barbara explained. You see, her injuries are much more severe than we expected, and if her muscles aren't relaxed during the process, the healing will be less effective and will take hours to complete. With her asleep and her muscles untensed, the task will be done faster and painlessly. Painlessly? Ganyu questioned. There's pain involved? Broken bones of this level require lots of work, meaning the process will involve antagonizing the injury. We always put patients at this level in a sleep state to avoid any discomfort, seeing we don't want the patient to feel anything. I see. Very interesting. Barbara nodded, continuing with further information. There's no telling how long healing the bone will take, so we'll start with more minor injuries first, then start on the bigger ones. If you don't mind me asking, what exactly led to her being in this state? Ganyu took a moment to think of the best way toward the answer, seeing she wasn't sure if Barbara was part of Jean's plan. Eventually, she found a way to say the truth, but keep it vague enough to keep the details hidden. She was blindsided by a massive explosion and barely escaped an attack that would have severed her arm completely from her shoulder. I was lucky to find her when I did. Otherwise, she might not be here right now. Barbara had covered her mouth with her hands in horror, but luckily didn't catch onto the whole picture. A relief to Ganyu as she awaited Barbara's response. That's horrible! Barbara commented with sadness in her voice. She's very fortunate that you were there to save her. Otherwise, her life would have been cut short. That would have been an unfortunate fate. But luckily, she had an angel come to her at just the right time. May Barbados bless your heart and soul, Miss Ganyu. Ganyu just nodded, finding the whole response kinda over the top. But she couldn't be rude to someone who was about to heal her only remaining colleague. Therefore, she just smiled and played nice like a good girl. Following the exclamation of absolute joy from Barbara, one of the other sisters of the church called out to her. Sister Barbara, we are ready to start. The young soul weaver winced at the calling of her name, addressing Ganyu one last time before returning to her duties. I'll be right there. Barbara responded to her fellow sister, turning back to Ganyu. You're more than welcome to stay, but I can't guarantee how long it'll take. It's all right, Ganyu assured. I'm willing to wait. Very well then. I'll do my best to heal her wounds back to full health. With that said, Barbara returned to the scene, checking if everything was in order to start the process. Ganyu knew she was in for a long wait, so she just took a seat and continued to watch the show, finding the whole thing interesting. The nuns and Barbara formed a circle, Barbara in the middle and the other clergy on the outside. Upon the formation, the young healer positioned herself on her knees and closed her eyes, her hands embracing each other as well as she started to speak a prayer. Lord Barbados, our heavenly protector and guide, please bless your injured child at my knees with a graceful recovery. Please give my sisters and I the strength to do this session smoothly and without any harm. And bless your child with great strength and might in the aftermath of her recovery. It is in your name and light we pray. With the prayer finished, Barbara began her work, starting by summoning elemental energy that radiated a blue glow that came to full formation in her palms. Once the energy had been concentrated to the source that she'd led it to, she started to hover her hands over Keqing's body. Upon the light of the energy gracing Keqing's flesh, Ganyu watched in amazement as her mild cuts and bruises started to fade away as if she'd never been hurt in the first place.
It was a mesmerizing sight to watch, but Ganyu knew these wounds were only the start. The more severe wounds were going to be much more of a challenge. After one session of Barbara hovering the energy over Keqing, her cuts, bruising, and burns were no longer existent. Barbara allowed herself a break to regain her energy for the more tedious damage she was yet to attempt, taking deep breaths and receiving support from the other present clergy. After about 5 minutes of regaining her energy and strength, Barbara moved to the next target area, the laceration in Keqing's right shoulder. She unwrapped the gauze bandaging, being careful to go slow and not antagonize the wound to where it could falter to a worse state. Upon meeting the last layer of the wrapping, she gasped at the sight and severity of the gash. Luckily, her ease with undoing the cloth bandage had kept the scabs that had formed from peeling off, preventing the bleeding from starting again. There was visible signs of the frostburn that had been caused by Ganyu's effort to save her colleague's life, the ends of the blood vessels that had been cleaved open appearing black in color. It wasn't anything serious, seeing it was a common tactic to use heat or cold to stop bleeding, and frostburn was no different. It did the job and had allowed Keqing to make it to Wangshu Inn alive and somewhat well. With the wound in full light, Barbara summoned her elemental energy yet again, focusing it to her palms. Just like before, she proceeded with hovering the energy over the wound and started concentrating heavily. Eventually, the light radiating from her palms started to illuminate a brighter glow, meaning she was pushing more energy into the process, and from the looks of it, was starting to affect the laceration. Slowly, the frost-bitten blood cells started to return to their usual state of health, and the scabbed skin started to close up and reattach as if time were in reverse. With one last push of energy, the once gash disappeared completely, and all that remained was healthy skin, with no sign of any prior rupture having existed. Ganyu was amazed at the sight, but could see that the effort had taken a lot out of Barbara. She was bent over and breathing very heavily, struggling to catch her breath from the amount of strength she just had to exert to do the job. "Sister Barbara, are you okay?" questioned one of the fellow nuns.
I'm fine,
Barbara responded, struggling to speak.
I just need a second to catch my breath.
"Please, sister, don't wear yourself down," spoke another one of the clergy. "This last injury is going to take even more energy than the last. Are you sure you can handle this?"
Yes, I just need a minute to regain my strength. After that, I'll be ready to go.
Even Ganyu grew worried for the young soul weaver's safety. She knew all too well about the price of overexerting yourself, seeing she'd done so by accident many times while working overtime. She wanted to speak, but didn't feel it was her place to do so. So she just kept herself quiet and allowed the session to go on. Barbara had taken 10 minutes to recover from the previous healing process, having returned and spoken another prayer before initiating the next healing session. Back on her knees and ready to go, Barbara channeled her elemental energy to her hands yet again, moving them to the target area. Prior to the start of the process, the clergy had removed the leggings, and upon seeing the wound fully, Ganyu had been sickened. The broken bone had been more than that, seeing it appeared that her bone had broken through her skin and was hanging out looking like a jagged dagger. While it had made her feel sick, the type of sick she felt was shock and sadness rather than nausea. The sight of the Archon War had made Ganyu numb to something like a compound fracture, having seen people get impaled, heads chopped off, limbs severed, and all sorts of other injuries that would give any clean soul PTSD as a result. She hadn't known that the injury classified as a broken bone had been this bad, and nearly made her cry at the sight. Just how much pain had Keqing suffered before she had saved her from it? Ganyu couldn't even imagine the amount of strength it must have taken to survive that night. The blue light radiated brightly yet again as Barbara started to push her strength into the elemental energy, the process seeming not to even affect the injury. Ganyu was proven right upon Barbara having to stop, her strength spent and her body exhausted from the process. "Sister Barbara, you won't last," spoke the same nun. "Please, you need to rest. If you continue, you may potentially cause yourself injury." Barbara couldn't answer, only breathing heavily and on the verge of collapsing. Therefore, Ganyu took that as an opening, seeing she wanted to help Keqing in any way possible. After her complete lack of sympathy at Wangshu Inn, she owed the Yuhong more than just an apology. "Excuse me," Ganyu started, catching the nun's attention instantly. "What is it that she needs to proceed? I'm half adeptus, so my strength is much more resistant to exhaustion than a human's." "Miss Ganyu, please, don't worry about me," Barbara trailed. Ganyu shook her head. "Sister Barbara, I want to help my colleague as much as you." Ganyu clarified. "Overexerting yourself isn't going to help anyone, so please, allow me to lend some strength to you to finish the job." A long moment paused before Barbara finally answered with a nod, her stubbornness finally breaking. "All right. Please do what you need to do to lend me your strength, Miss Ganyu." Ganyu nodded, getting up from her seat and walking over to Barbara's position. "Whenever you're ready to start channeling your energy, I'll begin," Ganyu assured, receiving a nod from Barbara. Once she was given the green light to start, Ganyu placed her right hand on Barbara's right shoulder and focused on channeling her energy to her palm. Upon the energy flowing from her core to Barbara's body, Ganyu's eyes began to glow a bright and radiant blue light. Barbara's energy now focused and beginning to move towards Keqing's wound. Upon finding the injury and starting the process, Barbara grew surprised by the effects of Ganyu's adeptus energy. The injury had instantly started to heal at a much faster pace than she had expected, and the amount of energy Barbara was using didn't even feel tiring. It was as if she weren't even doing anything, and upon the torn flesh closing and appearing as if nothing had even happened, Barbara finished the session by reverting her energy back to the core of her vision. Ganyu followed with the same action, her eyes returning to their non-illuminated state and reverting her hand back to her side. With the session now complete, Keqing's sedation was halted by the clergy, and with a groan of sleepiness from her mouth, she opened her eyes. A lot of the bloodshot nature of her sclera's had dissipated to Ganyu's relief, her many hours of resting having helped the most in that case. Aside from the visible dirt and ash covering her body, the Yuhong looked back to her usual self, and that was something Ganyu could smile at. Where am I?" Keqing questioned drowsily. "Ganyu? Is that you?" "Yes, Lady Keqing," Ganyu obliged. "It's all right. We're in Mondstadt." After departing from the church, Ganyu had decided to take Keqing back to her temporary home. It was only a temporary stay until Jean could arrange Keqing her own personal abode in the city, but Ganyu didn't mind regardless. After all, she'd known Keqing for a long time, so it wasn't like she was letting a stranger in to potentially rob her possessions. Keqing had also wanted to have a long-awaited bath, seeing she was still littered with debris from that night, and wanted to get the remnants of anything from that cataclysm off of her for good. Therefore, Ganyu had allowed her privacy, and to kill some time, had decided to go sightseeing. Even if there was a potential threat lingering amongst Teyvat, as a half-adeptus, she'd learned that you can't allow things to stop you from enjoying the good things in life. The Archon War had been a time of constant dread and sadness, but on the days when the sun actually had shone through the impact of the war, she had made sure to admire it, knowing it could have potentially been her last chance to experience happiness. Therefore, knowing this could be her last chance to admire the sights of Mondstadt, she took that opportunity. No messenger or someone like Amber or Kaya had come to lead her to the Knights of Avonia's headquarters for further planning on the situation at hand, so there was literally nothing else for her to do. She started by taking a stroll up to the cathedral's courtyard to admire the statue of Barbados, the animal archon. It was massive in height and was accompanied by a company of bards and nuns at its base. A variety of tunes were being strummed by said bards, all of them being unfamiliar to Ganyu's ancient memory. She was more familiar with tunes of Liwei's culture, having been born and raised in the Geo nation. However, the music was calming and melodic to her ears, seeming as if it were being played and sung by the animal archon himself whenever a breeze met the area. It was graceful and peaceful, giving her a sense of momentary bliss in the courtyard. After the statue, she moved further down into the city, finding many shops that she hadn't been aware of. Not far from Good Hunter was a trinket shop named With Wind Comes Glory that sold a variety of artifacts, decorative knickknacks, and other things like gemstones and fossils. Ganyu had decided to stroll in and just look around to kill time, having no currency that was required to purchase anything being sold. Her final stop before returning to confront Keqing had been the other local tavern, the Cat's Tail. She'd made plenty of new friendships with the cats roaming around inside and outside the establishment, and had met the bartender, Diona. Less to say, their first meet had started out quite awkwardly, but upon Ganyu stating that she wasn't there to drink herself drunk, they had gotten along and became friends. She'd tried to keep herself there for as long as she could, but eventually, she knew she had to go back to her practical home to face the music. Reluctantly, after a good hour, she finally took her leave from Mondstadt's sights and returned to her abode. Upon opening the door, she found her co-worker sprawled out on the provided bed, passed out. She'd hoped for her to just stay that way, but upon closing the door, Keqing shifted her body and began to stretch awake. Her colleague sat up and opened her eyes, dressed in some new clothes that were clearly too large for her. Apparently, she'd found Ganyu's spare attire and decided to give it a fitting.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you, Lady Keqing.
Ganyu apologized.
No worries.
Keqing replied drowsily.
I need to get up anyways.
Ganyu was defeated. Fate had clearly put her here, and there was no stopping it now. Therefore, she just let out a long sigh, to which Keqing spoke up.
Ganyu, is there something wrong?
Ganyu shifted her eyes and moved to Keqing's bedside, sitting down on the edge of it.
I need to say something to you.
Ganyu started slowly.
Something important.
Keqing was clearly confused, but she just followed Ganyu to continue her confession.
Okay. What is it?
Keqing replied. Another sigh escaped Ganyu, her head hanging and sorrow painted on her face.
You remember that morning at Wangshu Inn, right?
She started.
Before I left for here?
Yeah? Keqing responded in confusion.
Why?
Ganyu decided to just rip off the band-aid, otherwise she wouldn't get anywhere in her current predicament.
Well, after you thanked me for saving your life, I didn't say anything,
Nor did I really put any consideration into how you felt after the destruction of our home. I didn't think clearly, when all along it was clear that you were just as hurt as me. And you were looking for comfort in your grieving.
Keqing's expression shifted, having not expected this to be what Ganyu had to say at all. She had been expecting something in reference to the situation at hand, not herself. And that was enough for her to allow Ganyu to keep speaking.
I realized this last night when I finally cried for the first time. And the reason why I didn't see it was because we were always so different. However, after I realized that we and Bywin are all that's left of Liyue Harbor, I realized that the devastation of losing our home hadn't just affected me, but all of us. In the end of that disaster, you were lost and hurt, and I didn't realize it. Instead, I just treated you as if it were any other day, when in reality, you were looking for comfort. Someone to vent to, a shoulder to cry on, someone who would understand the pain you were feeling. Someone like me.
Keqing had caught onto the cause of Ganyu's sorrow, and she could see that it was clearly heavy on her conscience. Therefore, she tried her best to mull down the situation, putting her hand on Ganyu's shoulder in comfort.
Ganyu, it's okay.
Keqing calmed.
You're right. We always were opposites. And it's not your fault that we're different. Everything happened so fast, so it's natural that the impact on both of us didn't become immediately clear to you. So please, don't blame yourself for not realizing it.
Ganyu lifted her head at the kindness of Keqing's words, allowing her to continue.
The past is the past, and there's no need to dwell on it. I'm alive because of you, and you've given me a chance to live a longer life. That's something I am eternally grateful for, and will never forget to my last breath. So please, let the past rest, and focus on the future.
Keqing smiled as a way of showing that she'd already forgiven her, and upon that comforting assurance, Ganyu's lips curved into a smile of her own.
All right.
Ganyu agreed.
But let me at least treat you to a meal.
If you wish.
Keqing agreed.
I hate to see you go hungry though, seeing I'm aware you don't eat things like meat.
I'll be fine,
Ganyu insisted.
Shilin aren't very gluttonous, so I can spare one meal.
Keqing shook her head, refusing to just gorge herself in front of her colleague like a hungry beast.
Not a chance, Ganyu,
she enforced.
If I am going to eat, you're going to eat too.
Ganyu knew it was pointless to argue with Keqing, so she just came up with an idea that would solve the issue altogether.
All right, then get your shoes on,
Ganyu ordered, getting to her feet.
Where are we going?
Keqing questioned.
For a walk. You're going to pick some flowers for me to eat.
Five daisies and 10 sweet flowers rested upon the table Ganyu had decided to occupy with her colleague, having been picked by said occupant along their walk around the perimeter of Mondstadt's walls. It had taken around 20 minutes to do a whole lap around the entirety of the city's borders, the trek having been peaceful with some conversation, to which both of them had enjoyed dearly after going through the past days of sorrow and grief. While the sights had been nowhere near the massive peaks of Liyue, It had been a peaceful serenity that the two could agree had been a great change of pace to their current situation. They even stopped to admire the view of Mondstadt Cider Lake, the sight having been the equivalent of looking into the very manifestation of infinity, given how the lake had no borders and extended long beyond the horizon of Teyvat. It had been a view that two of them had never seen, and had led them to feeling as if all turmoil had disappeared from the world for just the slightest moment. But it was eventually broken by Mondstadt's church bell ringing out the current time at the moment. It had rung 7 times, meaning dark was approaching, which led them back into the city. Keqing had chosen Good Hunter as her preferred place to eat at, so Ganyu hadn't objected and had led her to their current spot. Her attendee's face was shielded by the provided menu of the establishment, scrolling through the massive variety of dishes that the place had to offer. As expected, Ganyu's nose had met the overwhelming scent of meat dishes, but to avoid being disrespectful to her co-worker, she just powered through the smell. Keqing had been aware Ganyu wasn't a meat fan, so in return, she had decided to avoid getting something like steak or anything beefy. It was practically like eating one of Ganyu's own qilin, and she didn't want to offend or disgust her colleague. Therefore, she turned to the seafood part of the menu and found a dish similar to her favorite that she'd usually order from Liyue Harbor's restaurants, a fancy dish named Crispy Potato Shrimp Platter. She lowered the menu, to which Ganyu winced at, surprised that Keqing had found something so quick in the array of dishes listed.
Find something?
Ganyu asked.
Yeah, it's very similar to the golden shrimp balls I used to order all the time in Liyue Harbor's food establishments.
Keqing replied. Ganyu could see that Keqing had decided against anything like red meat or poultry for her sake, and immediately spoke out on it.
Lady Keqing, please don't hold back on ordering what you truly want because of me.
Ganyu stated.
This meal is for you, and I don't want to be the reason why you order something that you don't want.
Keqing shook her head.
No, it's fine.
Keqing assured.
I'm not a huge fan of things like steak anyway. I'm more a fish or seafood type of person. So please, don't worry about it.
Reluctantly, Ganyu just nodded her head.
All right, I believe you.
Ganyu assured. Keqing smiled and nodded, getting up and walking to the counter of Good Hunter. She gave her order to the waitress, Sara, and walked back to the table, scooting her chair back in.
Should be about 20 minutes.
Keqing inquired, looking downward at Ganyu's serving of vegetation.
Please, you don't need to wait for me, Ganyu. Eat if you wish to.
Ganyu shook her head in disagreement.
That would be very disrespectful of me, Lady Keqing.
Ganyu stated.
I can wait for you to be served your food first.
Keqing nodded her head.
All right, if you wish to, I'll oblige.
Keqing agreed.
Also, no need to be so formal. Just call me Keqing.
Ganyu just agreed, wanting to respect her colleague's wishes. Resting her arms lazily upon the table, Keqing started conversing with her fellow co-worker. It wasn't very often the two got to actually talk about things outside of their occupation, so she took that opportunity.
So, how are you liking it here?
Keqing started.
It's been all right.
Ganyu attempted, not being one for conversation.
Between what happened and coping with the reality of it, it's been hard.
I see. Keqing replied with sorrow, taking a minute to find the right words.
Ever since that night, I've been lost. Everything happened so fast that it doesn't even seem like it's real, even though I saw the city sink right before my eyes. We were so confident that we had the upper hand and could stop it before it even had a chance to start. But upon the first explosion, I knew that we had been fools that thought we were invincible. The entire time I was trying to find help among the fires and suffocating smoke, the only thing I was thinking of was the things I cared for the most. I saw my past as a child, my family before I left them to pursue a career, the things I never got to do or say. And the entire time I was wondering, is this it? Is this my last day? My last breaths? My last chance to say the things I never got to say? It was as if my entire life was flashing before me, and when I had finally accepted that my time had come, I heard the sound of footsteps. They had been hazy and distant, but I knew they had been real, and in that moment, I had done something that I had never done in my entire life. I had turned to the gods for answers. I asked, if the gods really don't judge any of their subjects, then show me now. And right after that, I saw a silhouette among the flames. It got closer and closer, and once I saw that two horns were atop their head, I knew it was you. That's when I called out your name, and you saved me from a sure death.
Ganyu gasped at the explanation, knowing Keqing was being serious. She'd always known Keqing as one who despised the gods, so for her to turn to them for an answer in her most desperate moment, she must have truly felt hopeless in her near last moments of life. With that information, the truth hit harder than before, seeing it seemed as if Ganyu had been an answer sent by the gods to save her from death. Something even Ganyu, a servant of Morax, had a hard time believing, but knew for sure that it was true.
To be honest, before I saw or heard you call out to me, it truly felt as if I'd failed to save any lives, and all I had hoped for was that not to be true.
Ganyu confessed.
After searching the buildings and seeing the charred bodies of the very people I'd sworn to protect from harm, I really felt like I'd violated my contract and that I had no reason to live anymore.
Keqing's eyes bulged at the confession from her colleague, knowing she wasn't bluffing and meant exactly what she was leading to.
Had your voice not called out when it did, I probably would have chosen to perish with Liyue Harbor.
Ganyu continued.
Therefore, in a way, you saved my life as well that night, and I don't believe it's a coincidence that we met up in both of our greatest moments of hopelessness. As you stated, I think it was an act of fate by the gods, giving us a second chance.
Keqing couldn't believe it. Now she knew for a fact that the gods had spared her and Ganyu from death, and that they had not been spared out of pity, but for another reason.
Then, let me ask you, seeing you've lived and experienced much more than me, why do you think we were spared?
Keqing questioned.
Do you think it was solely out of retribution for Liyue Harbor's demise?
Ganyu put a hand to her chin in thought, curious herself on why things had played out like they did.
In my years of life during the Archon War, I saw many great cities and kingdoms fall, so I doubt it was for that reason.
Ganyu explained.
I once asked Rex Lapis if he believed Liyue Harbor would outlast eternity, and even he said he didn't believe it would, seeing every nation eventually meets its end, no matter how great it may be. It's part of the natural flow of history and time, and corrosion is the ultimate enemy of anyone or anything.
Keqing nodded in agreement.
If the very god who created Liyue Harbor said that, then our reasoning for surviving that night is definitely not due to the current actions we are forging with Mondstadt's government.
Keqing analyzed.
But, if not that reason, then what else?
Ganyu answered by putting her right hand atop Keqing's left one, lightly smiling.
The gods work in mysterious ways, and the best thing we can do is keep living the lives we were granted a second chance at.
Ganyu advised.
The reason of our survival that night will come with time, so it's best not to even worry about it and focus on the present.
Keqing nodded, realizing Ganyu's words were correct. She was worrying about something that will eventually come to both of them in the future. When? Only the gods knew that answer.
You're right.
Keqing admitted with a blush.
Looks like old habits don't die easily.
Ganyu giggled at that.
Let's just enjoy the night.
Ganyu finished, moving her hand back to her side of the table. So they did, without a single thought of anything to do with their current situation. Keqing received her meal around the estimated wait time of 20 minutes later, and as they ate together, they enjoyed the sights the night had to offer while having laughs over tales of their past. It had turned out that this hadn't been Keqing's first time in Mondstadt, and that she had been there before as a young aspiring child. She had come here with her parents, mainly to sightsee and taste the cuisine during the Windbloom Festival, and Keqing had been amazed at the sights of the celebration. She had only been able to attend a single day before heading back to Liyue, but less to say, she remembered that single day perfectly. The city was bustling with bards and tons of different decor that symbolized their god Barbados in more ways than one. Keqing explained, having finished her order. It's definitely something everyone should experience at least once when they visit here, even if they reside from another nation. Ganyu felt as if she were talking to a whole different person at this point. She'd known Keqing as a strict and hard worker that didn't take any clout in her duties as the Yuheng. So to see her so open and carefree without being drunk was a whole different kind of experience for Ganyu. She seemed like a kid who was telling her every story she possibly knew, and Ganyu was all for listening.
I'm sure it's an amazing experience.
Ganyu agreed, nibbling away at the remaining petals of the sweet flower gripped in her right hand. It's basically the Mondstadt version of Liyue's Lantern Rite Festival, only with different traditions and such. Keqing stated confidently. She paused for a short moment, wondering if she should even say her next words. Eventually, she decided to just go for it, seeing it wasn't anything illegal or offensive. Perhaps I can show you myself, if we manage to survive until next spring. Keqing offered. Ganyu blushed and winced at that comment, surprised that Keqing had even offered her any sort of acquaintance as such.
Keqing, that's very kind of you, but I'm not the best with festivals or any sort of social gathering.
Ganyu stumbled.
I'd most likely run the experience.
Keqing shook her head. Ganyu, I've worked with you for nearly 2 decades now. If I can put up with you for that long, I doubt you could run a festival for me. Keqing countered. Besides, I wouldn't make the experience to a point where you'd feel uncomfortable. I know full well that you aren't a socialite, so I'd make it so that you'd be able to enjoy the festival without being put outside your comfort zone.
Oh? In what way would you accomplish that?
Ganyu asked. By allowing you to see the sights, taste the food, sample the drinks that are non-alcoholic, and all together just have a good time. Ganyu gripped her chin in thought, pondering about the proposition she'd been offered, eventually coming to a conclusion.
Very well, Keqing. I accept.
Ganyu assured.
That is, if we get to that point.
Keqing nodded, coming back to reality.
Right.
let's focus on the matter at hand first. Then, once it's resolved, make plans for the Windbloom Festival next year.
Sounds good.
Ganyu agreed, chomping down the last of her dinner.
Well, now that we're full, and our hunger is satisfied, shall we get back to the room?
Sure. After all, tomorrow is going to be a long day, so we'd best get some rest. Keqing agreed, following Ganyu in getting up from her seat and moving back to the practical home they'd been provided. It was only a short walk of about 5 minutes, the two coming to the door in less than that and unlocking it. Entering the abode, Ganyu lit the provided candles with their accompanied matches, something she hadn't noticed the previous night, and moved to the bathroom to freshen up for the night. She shut the door, then moved to the mirror, being met by her reflection shortly. She splashed her face with some water to remove any dirt or anything else that the winds of Mondstadt may have littered her face with, then wiped away the remains of it with a nearby rag. With her skin clean, she proceeded with removing her hair tie from her icy blue locks, allowing her hair to flow freely over her back and shoulders. It was like a secondary natural blanket for her body that did its job well, having kept her body warm as if she were wrapped in sheets wool while she slept over her centuries of life. Lastly, she kicked off her shoes and set them aside where they wouldn't cause either her or Keqing to trip in the morning, having learned that lesson decades ago. Freshened up for slumber, Ganyu retired from the bathroom, back into the main part of the entire room that she called home for now. Keqing was in nothing but her bra and underwear upon her exit, a familiar sight to Ganyu's memory. Keqing wasn't even fazed by her colleague walking in on her half naked, seeing the two had been out in the fields together many times before. Therefore, they had seen each other in their near natural states many times in their careers as members of Ningguang's government. Keqing unwrapped her pigtails from the hairpiece that gave her fake cat ears, eventually pulling it out completely and causing her violet mane to collapse to its natural straightened state. Her locks extended down past her buttocks, draping over them like a curtain to a group of actors at the end of a performance on a stage.
I see you let your hair grow out more,
Ganyu commented.
I see yours hasn't changed,
Keqing replied back. But that's expected of a Qilin, seeing their hair also acts as a blanket. Ganyu smiled, happy that Keqing had taken time to learn about her kind.
You're okay with sleeping together?
It's only for one night, and I'd rather not have you sleeping elsewhere where you're not comfortable, Keqing assured. Besides, it's not like we're doing anything else. We're just getting some much needed sleep for the day ahead. Ganyu nodded in agreement.
Which side do you want?
Either is fine, Keqing confirmed. Ganyu nodded again.
All right, I'll take the left side then,
Ganyu decided, moving to the bed and settling herself into a comfortable position. Keqing followed shortly, pulling the covers over her body and moving into a proper pose for the night.
Good night, Keqing,
Ganyu said, closing her eyes.
Good night, Ganyu,
Keqing returned, and upon shutting her heavy eyelids, she dozed off into a dream she'd most likely forget. Ganyu had followed suit, the warmth of her practical blanket of long light blue locks embracing her into a blissful slumber under the starry sky of Mondstadt's night.